Hi guys, Kremp again today. Hope you're doing well and enjoying your day. So far the season is officially over. The Esports World Cup has concluded. OpTic Gaming go back-to-back in the last two tournaments of the year, pocketing well over $1 million. So much reaction as a result to this tournament. Scrappy was talking about the fact that Mercules saved this team. If it wasn't for him, it'd have been a very different story. And Shotzzy revealing after the tournament concludes that dropping Huke as they did earlier this season to bring back Pred, that was a major mistake and more than likely one they will not be making. That is implied going into this off-season. Very much into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. So much to get into, of course. Just wanted to touch quickly on the event as a whole, how different it seemed to last year, because last year the event venue, the setup, you know, the crowd that they had, for example, was different to what, I mean, this year was just better, straight up. And, you know, obviously I wasn't there in person, but it certainly, in terms of the setup and everything, all the questions that happened going into the event around the game was going to be broken, the spawns weren't going to work, and all this stuff. And, okay, yeah, it wasn't ideal. There were some technical issues over the first few days. The codcaster was causing some problems, but fundamentally it was better than maybe some of us expected it to be. So that was one piece of the discussion. Yeah, they allowed coaches, and we thought, okay, is that going to take away to some degree from the quality of the gameplay and reduce the skill gap in some sense? Did it really make much difference? In my opinion, no. And, you know, I think based on what we saw over the last few days, I'd be down to at least see it trialed in the CDL as well. Now, as I mentioned at the end of the video last night, there is going to be an element of people saying, well, at the end, like OpTic won champs, they won this event, so clearly, you know, it matters and all this. I think the single elimination still is the bit that people are hung up on, and I totally understand that. I think if it's single elimination, it would be nice to have it as best of sevens, possibly, if they are going to keep with this format going forwards. But at the end of the day, to win this tournament is, you know, not easy. You've got to get through 2 matches at least in the groups. You've then got to get through an 8-team bracket to win the tournament. There was a consolation final as well. So I don't know where people are going to rank this tournament, because going in, I think there was kind of a mix of opinions. No one says it's as valuable as champs, but even though Scrappy did say that maybe at some point it could be, I think, you know, we'll see how time goes on, how much the Esports World Cup continues to grow and continue and all this stuff over the coming years, but no one had it on that level. The question for some was, okay, where does it stand compared to a major, for example? And my opinion was it was kind of like a major plus. I don't know, I had it similar to a major, maybe slightly above. I think my opinion is probably the same after the event. So intrigued to your thoughts on that in the comments below. But OpTic get the win. This was, I mean, the crucial series of getting it done, because no losers bracket, right? If they lost this series, if they lost that Hassie control, if they didn't bring the comeback on the rewind hardpoint, they would have, and obviously the protocol, they were helped out by a Mercules 1v3 masterclass. You know, if they didn't bring this back, they would not have won this tournament. So this was a crazy moment. I know that JP did a tweet saying, like, this was basically the COD gods testing OpTic to see, okay, are you worthy of being the best team of the season? And, well, there was no doubt about that. They then smoked Surge in the grand finals. Feel bad for Surge, obviously. There was some reaction there because they played 5 grand finals this year. If you include their online one, they played at Minor 2. They lost that one 4-3 to Thieves. They got 4-0'd by FaZe at Major 2, 4-0'd by Thieves at Major 3, 5-3'd by OpTic in the Champs grand finals, and then 4-0'd again. So they might be cursed. The reality is, I don't think we're going to see this team together again. There will be, for a couple of different reasons. You could look at this team and say, is it possible to upgrade it in some element? Maybe Surge will look to do that. The other option, which is probably more likely, is that one of these guys at least gets caught up in the Rostermania chaos to come. They're based out of Vancouver, which is not the most attractive place to be for players, generally speaking. I don't know how much, just because of the internet and stuff like that, we don't know how much they're getting paid exactly, but I think it's reasonable to believe that these guys, if they got an offer from another top team, it would at least be rather compelling. And I wouldn't be especially surprised that it happens. So, you know, it's going to be an interesting one to look back on, because I'd be surprised if this team stays together. And if they do, then maybe they got a chance to go on better next year. But, you know, they had plenty of chances this season. They couldn't take advantage of it. To feel terrible for these players. But, you know, I would be surprised if we see this team of 4 again together next season. As Neptune says, super disappointing way to end out the year. GG's OpTic placed second again. Sorry to the Surge fans. Really wanted this one, but OpTic were just way too good at the end of the game. And as Shotzzy says, battle tested, shout out Merc the Kids Generational, and then a couple of hours later says, yeah, the job actually is finished now. EWC World Champions, if you want to say that. Of course, there's going to be a lot of talk about Shotzzy now, right? He actually won the tournament MVP. Dashy was finals MVP, and there was really no doubt about that one. But Shotzzy wins tournament MVP, and yeah, what a run, right? What a turnaround from all the comments that Shotzzy made at the start of the season, some of the comments even that he made here after the event, and yeah, highly deserved. And where does it put him on this all-time level? Look, people will base that discussion on how much they consider EWC to matter in the grand scheme of COD. At the end of the day, Shotzzy was already a 3-time world champion going into this event, but now he's a World Cup winner as well, and that does matter, right? Like, in the grand scheme of things, as I've said before, if the Esports World Cup continues for another decade, you know, being an Esports World Cup winner will matter in the legacy discussions at some point. It may not matter massively now, but in the grand scheme of things, it will. So, I don't know where you put Shotzzy, but if you want to look at the rankings, you're looking at Kremp, you're looking at Scump, you're looking at Karma, Clay. I mean, is he above Formal now, Shotzzy, in his all-time COD career? I think you can certainly debate it. Huke, of course, had a very emotional rollercoaster of a season, as he says. Crazy journey for me this year, but that's the best part. As always, GG's to every team we played, and goodbye to BO6, onwards to the next. Shotzzy in the reply is dropping the nuke, and it was a fascinating Championship Sunday in many ways, because even going into the Sunday, I wouldn't have told you it was 100% guaranteed that OpTic were going to stay together. Let's say they lost to Heretics, they got 3-0'd by Heretics, they lose the Hacienda, they then drop to the consolation final, they get beaten in 5 by Toronto. Just purely talking hypotheticals here. But let's say that actually happens. Would OpTic, obviously it would be bittersweet. So they'd have won champs, they would have felt like the best team still there at the World Cup. They wouldn't have won it if that had happened. And it could have happened. There was a world where, you know, Miami did 3-0 them, as crazy as that series was. And there was obviously a world in which OpTic beat them more comfortably, because it was, you know, 250, 249, 6-5 in the search with a crazy comeback. So, you know, it was all to play for, as we know. But had they bowed out on the Sunday earlier than they'd have wanted to, you know, it would have been very disappointing, and they would have at least had to, you know, think about, okay, how do we manage to fall short quite in this way? In the end, though, they won it, and they went back to back, and Shotzzy had a few words to say and says, look, unfortunately dropping Kyler, and they've dropped Kyler a good few times at this point. Certainly earlier this season, right, when Pred got dropped for Huke, and then Huke was dropped for Pred again, and then obviously Huke comes back in when Pred was got again, and it was complete chaos. And, you know, Shotzzy makes it pretty clear that, yeah, that was a pretty dumb mistake getting rid of Huke at the time, but we got him back, he was willing to come back, and then we won everything in the end. And I think it was, yeah, very clearly implied here that whatever Hex had to say and whatever the team had to say after last year's World Championship about whether they should, you know, still make a change. But as we know, last year they won champs, and then they went to the World Cup and they didn't win. They lost to FaZe. And yeah, that was only a one single loss that they had at the tournament, but it was not what they wanted. And as a result, with Scrap and HyDra available, Hex, as we know in recent weeks, was very keen to get that move done. And maybe because they were starting to see cracks in that team last year anyway. This year does feel like a bit of a different story. You know, it doesn't feel like there are really cracks under the surface. If there were, they wouldn't have just gone back-to-back at the 2 biggest prize money tournaments and the most important in many respects of the entire year. And yeah, there are still big-name players available potentially out there, but it's maybe not quite the same market as when Scrap and HyDra were totally free, because, you know, those are arguably the 2 best players in the game for a large part of this season, and they're now locked down this year. So yeah, Simp could be available, but it just doesn't really add up anymore, which means OpTic are in a pretty comfortable position, with Shotzzy saying, yeah, we dropped Huke, we're not going to do that again, not going to make that mistake again, and now they can sit back and try and watch all these other teams form God Squads, or at least try to take them down next year. Of course, Dashy, you know, he's done it again, back-to-back, obviously back-to-back World Championships, and now back-to-back at the end of the season. As Shotzzy says, thanks EWC for hosting this wonderful event. The hospitality was exceptional from start to finish. I appreciate the crowd who showed up this week to support me and the team. They all showed the love. See you soon, right? So we will be back, of course, in a few months for next season, but before then, it's going to be absolute chaos. Ben Beans, this is a tweet that, well, a DM that Dashy sent Ben Beans on the 27th of April, saying, what are you thinking right now? When obviously Major 3 was going on, and he was like, damn, who is this kid? Scumpy Regen? How did no one notice this kid playing as formal in challenges? And it was funny, because Shotzzy recognised in hindsight that he was actually preying on Mercules' downfalls. They didn't have to make a change, but in the end, and it all worked out rather spectacularly. It was literally Formal's ringer down there in Challenger, so pretty wild stuff. And look at the numbers here from Dashy over the tournament. He had a 1.51 in the grand finals of CWL Las Vegas 2019, which actually happened in December 2018, but it was part of that Black Ops 4 2019 season. And then a 1.48. There's only 2 players ever who have dropped a 1.48 KD or more. Obviously, it's kind of cherry-picked, right, to put Dashy in, but you know what I'm saying anyway. You know, to get a KD on that level, to do that in 2 different matches is pretty rare, and the only 2 to have done it precisely to these exact numbers are Dashy and Formal, which is a pretty good pairing. The highest KD of the tournament, however, can you guess who it was? It did end up going to Pred. Now, we talked about this yesterday, that so Clayster was kind of exposing that Pred was playing for kills because there was a $50,000 bonus on the line for having the highest KD of the tournament. Now, going into yesterday, JoeDeceives and I think Inside, they had high KDs, but they were set to play 2 very challenging games, which they did, and therefore their KDs dropped. So at the end of the tournament, Pred sticks out with a 1.24, then JoeDeceives, Sib, Dashy, Scrap, Insight, Craze, Rencor, Gwinn, Mercules. That's your top 10. So, I can't lie, pretty wild timelines that Pred presumably is going to bag the extra 50k bonus for that. Now, this was from Scrappy. We obviously got some reaction from many of the other players saying, damn, like that was a typical end of the year. And fair play to Scrap because, you know, being nice and cordial to his rivals, but equally people that he knows and gets along with relatively well, and maybe will look to team with in the future, depending on what happens, but more than likely not this upcoming season. As Scrap says, typical bros, Shotzzy, Huke, Dashy, especially from the kid that changed these guys' season, right? So I thought it was, you know, nice comment, really kind of tongue-in-cheek. Obviously, he doesn't mean it to be too serious, but he's not necessarily wrong. Had Mercules not been discovered, not turned up as he did, it would have been a very different end to the year for OpTic Texas and, well, for OpTic Gaming, right, as we know, as they ended up closing out the season under that banner at the end of the year. Even we had this from Karma. I thought it was pretty cool to look back at this, right, because I kind of forget about this tweet at the time, but I do remember it now in hindsight, when he tweeted out June the 4th, 2020, that, you know, he'll be back. Now, this is when he just retired from professional play. So this was on the Seattle Surge team at the time. It was a bit of a disaster of a year. It was, what was it? Apathy, Enable, Slacked, and Octane. Was that the team of 4 or the team of 5 with Karma along for the ride as well? And there was a lot of drama over there. They had, you know, Proto, they had Panda, they had Joey Nubsy as the coach, and it just wasn't a good team, and it wasn't a good season for those guys. Karma decided, you know what, I've had a good career. OpTic dropped me in 2018. I came back, I won a championship with them the year after, collected the bag for a year on Surge, and now I'm just going to call it a day. So he retired, but at the time he said, I'll be back, and it wasn't really clear at the time what this was going to look like. Karma kind of took a couple of years off, then he was convinced, or he wanted to, come back to coach, and that's what he did. He steps in for OpTic last season, immediately they start to see some good success. And I think for Karma, it really feels like he's become, I think when he first came in, I wouldn't say he was just there for the vibes, but like, it wasn't clear that he was a coach. He was just there as one of the greatest to ever do it. To be almost like it almost felt like he was a bit of a consultant, really, who wasn't super like embedded in the team. He was just there to help them in certain elements. But over the last 12 months, I feel like Karma's really become the coach of this team, and you can really feel that, I think, in the way that the team culture is and how integrated he's become. And I think that's, you know, it's been a difference maker. And we said this, right, even before this happens, we were talking about, like, OpTic have Kremp as part of OpTic, they've got Karma, they've got Scum, they've got Formal, like, you know, they should be using these resources. And, well, they started to do so middle of last season, and it's worked out in that manner. Just this final tweet to close out with from Attach. OpTic should not change their roster going into next season. I don't really think anyone is going to disagree with that assessment. Obviously, you could make the discussion, I mean, how many teams have won big stuff and actually made it work again, but just with the circumstances, it's impossible really to argue, I think, that they should. But if it doesn't work out next year, then you've got options, because after next season, presumably HyDra and Scrappy will be unrestricted free agents. Something to keep in mind. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.
I did in all the interviews, but the season me and Brendan had in the beginning of the year, you know, obviously, unfortunately, dropping Kyler. Dumbest mistake for sure, unfortunately. But, hey, we got him back and won everything. So it feels amazing, honestly, to turn the season around for sure.